I noticed the moment my future mother-in-law handed me a dish towel instead of a wine glass. She didn't do it with malice. That was the part I kept turning over in my mind on the drive home. She did it the way you hand something to someone whose hands you assume are already available, someone without anywhere more important to be. That moment came near the end of the evening. Before that, there had been smiles and a pot roast and a living room that smelled like dryer sheets and old carpet. Before that, there had been a 2-hour drive through flat Ohio countryside with my boyfriend's hand resting on my knee and him saying, "Just be yourself. They're going to love you." I had smiled and looked out the window and thought, that's the thing about being yourself. It only works if people are willing to see you. My name is Sylvia. I'm a trauma surgeon. I've been one for going on 6 years, and before that, I was a resident for 5. And before that, I was in medical school. And before all of it, I was a girl from Cincinnati who decided at age 11 that she wanted to save lives, and then spent the next 20 years doing exactly what it took to make that happen. I tell you this not to impress you. I tell you this because it matters to the story, not because of the title, but because of what it cost. My boyfriend, his name is Grant, never knew any of that when we met. We met at a trivia night at a bar in Columbus on a rainy Tuesday in October. I was there with 2 friends from the hospital. He was there with guys from his office. Our teams got seated at adjacent tables, and somewhere between the geography round and the pop culture round, we started whispering answers back and forth like we were cheating on a test. His team won. My team didn't mind. He asked for my number before the bar closed. I gave it to him, and then I spent the drive home trying to remember the last time I'd done something that spontaneous. We went on 4 dates before he asked me what I did for work. I said I worked at the hospital. He said, "Doing what?" I said, "Medicine." He nodded and said his college roommate had gone pre-med before switching to business, and that it must be a lot of school. I said, "Yes, a lot of school." He didn't push further, and I didn't correct the omission. People always want to know why I didn't just say it plainly. Surgeon, trauma, 14-hour shifts, split-second decisions, a pager that didn't care what day it was. And the honest answer is that I'd said it plainly before, on first dates and second dates and at dinner parties, and I had watched the shift happen in real time. The way people's spines straightened, the way they started performing for me, the way men in particular either became suddenly competitive or suddenly diminished, one or the other, like there was no in between. I was tired of that shift. I wanted to be known before I was assessed. So with Grant, I let things develop slowly. I worked at the hospital, long hours, stressful. He never pressed, and I never lied. I just didn't frame it. By the time he proposed, 8 months in, it felt both too late and too unnecessary to stop and say, "By the way, I operate on people with traumatic brain injuries. By the way, last March, I worked 36 hours straight after a multi-vehicle crash on I-70. By the way, my attendings call me one of the sharpest residents they've trained, and I've only gotten sharper since." He proposed on a Sunday morning in the kitchen, no ring yet, because he said he wanted me to pick it out, which I loved him for, and I said yes, because I meant it. His parents lived about 90 minutes north, in the kind of small Ohio town where the same families have run the same businesses for 3 generations, and everyone went to the same high school. Grant grew up there. He talked about it fondly. Friday night football, the county fair, his mom's Christmas cookies that he said were genuinely the best thing he'd ever eaten. He was not embarrassed by where he came from. That was one of the things I liked about him. His parents had been asking to meet me for months. His mother, especially. Grant said she was excited. Traditional, he said. Warm. "She just wants to make sure you're good for me," he said, laughing. I said that was fine. I was curious, too. We drove up on a Saturday in late spring. I wore a blue wrap dress and brought a bottle of good red wine and spent most of the drive listening to Grant tell me stories about the town, about the neighbors, about his dad's opinions on things. His dad had worked in manufacturing his whole career, retired at 62, coached youth baseball for 15 years. Proud man. Self-made in the way that mattered to him. The house was a colonial with green shutters and a big oak tree in the front yard. There were wind chimes on the porch, a welcome mat that said home is where the heart is, the kind of house that had been lived in and cared for and not changed much in 30 years. His mother opened the door before we reached the porch. She was small and energetic, with reading glasses pushed up on her head and an apron she hadn't taken off. She hugged Grant first and then turned to me with both hands outstretched. "You must be Sylvia," she said. "We've heard so much about you." His father appeared behind her, broad, gray at the temples, the kind of handshake that's more like a test. "Grant says you work at the hospital," he said. "That's right," I said. "Good steady work," he said, nodding, already walking back toward the living room. I followed them inside and noticed, without meaning to, how he said it. Good steady work. The same tone you'd use for someone who worked at the post office, which is fine, which is honest work. But the assumption underneath it was already there, already settled, like furniture that had been in that room a long time. We sat in the living room. His mother brought out a cheese plate and sparkling water and asked if I wanted the tour. I said I'd love one. She walked me through the hallway of family photos. Grant at every age, his sister's wedding portrait, a photo of his father shaking hands with someone at a company event. And she was warm and funny and easy to talk to. I liked her, genuinely, in that first half hour. Dinner was pot roast and green beans and rolls from a bakery in town. We sat at a round table in the kitchen because his mother said the dining room was too formal for family. I appreciated that. His father asked about the hospital early in the meal. "What department are you in?" he said. "Surgery," I said. "Like assisting?" his mother asked, not unkindly, the way someone asks something they believe they already know the answer to. "I'm a surgeon," I said. There was a small pause. His father tilted his head slightly. "What kind?" "Trauma," I said. "So head injuries, internal bleeding, that kind of thing. Emergencies." His father nodded slowly. "Huh. So like, you're in the OR, yes." He made a sound that wasn't quite a word and reached for the salt. And then, because it was clearly where his mind went, "That must be rough." "The hours, they are," I said. "My buddy's wife is a nurse," he said. "She says the hospital is just, you're on your feet all day, no breaks. They work you like a dog." "That's true," I said. And then the conversation moved on, to Grant's sister's new house, to whether the county was going to repave the road on the north side of town, to a neighbor who had recently retired. I ate and listened and answered when asked and noticed the things I was noticing. His mother asked, about an hour into dinner, whether I planned to keep working after we had kids. She said it gently, a woman genuinely asking, not intending a trap. "It must be hard to imagine giving that up," she said. "All that training." "I don't plan to give it up," I said. She nodded, but her eyes went somewhere else, the way eyes do when they've already decided something. His father talked about his own career, the discipline it took, getting up at 5 every morning, never missing a day, working his way up from the floor to management in 12 years. He said young people today didn't understand what it meant to build something from scratch. Grant laughed politely and agreed in the vague way you agree with your parents about things you don't entirely agree with. No one asked about my career. The question had been answered apparently. Hospital, surgery, long hours, that was enough of a box. Near the end of dinner, his mother stood up to start clearing plates, and she looked at me and said, "Would you mind helping with the dishes?" Grant and his dad do the same thing every year. They disappear the minute dinner's done. She laughed. I stood up and followed her into the kitchen, and she handed me a dish towel and pointed to the drying rack. I stood there with the towel in my hands and dried dishes, and I thought about the operating room, about the morning 3 weeks earlier when I had spent 6 hours removing a subdural hematoma from a 24-year-old who had been in a car accident and had come out of that room knowing the kid was going to be okay and had stood in the hallway for 30 seconds just breathing. I thought about the number of people who reported to the surgical unit under my direction. I thought about what my hands had done that morning and what they were doing now. I dried the dishes. I didn't say any of it. His father wandered back into the kitchen for a beer and leaned against the counter and looked at me with something approaching friendliness. "So Grant says you two met at trivia," he said. "We did," I said. "I always liked trivia," he said. "You're smart then." "I try to be," I said. He chuckled. And then something shifted in him, not rudely, just carelessly, and he said, "You know, I'll be honest with you. I wasn't sure about Grant dating someone with such a demanding job. I always figured he'd end up with someone a little more available, for the family. But he says you make it work." I kept my expression neutral. "We do," I said. "That's good," he said. "That's all that matters." He took his beer back to the living room. His mother, who had heard some of this, gave me a small sympathetic smile. "He means well," she said. "I know," I said. The thing was, I believed her. That was what made it harder. After dinner, we moved to the living room. Grant's father put on the news and then muted it, which meant it was just there in the background, a visual low hum. His mother brought out coffee and a store-bought pie she'd heated up, and she was apologetic about the pie being store-bought, and I told her it was delicious, which it was. His father asked Grant about work. Grant was a project manager at a logistics firm. He talked about a contract they'd just landed, something about distribution expansion. His father listened closely, asked real questions, leaned forward. Pride, clear and uncomplicated. I watched them together, and I didn't resent it. It was a good thing to see, a father proud of his son. I just noticed the contrast. Then his father turned to me and said something that stopped the air in the room. "No offense to you," he said, "but don't surgeons sort of just follow orders? Like the doctor tells you what to do and you do it?" I looked at him for a moment. "I am the doctor," I said. His mother set her coffee cup down very carefully. His father stared at me. "I thought you said you were a surgeon." "Surgeons are doctors," I said. "I went to medical school. I have an MD. I did a 5-year residency after that, and then a fellowship. I'm a board-certified trauma surgeon." No one spoke. Grant, to his credit, reached over and put his hand on mine, but I noticed the reaching was slightly delayed, like it took a second to recalibrate. His father's expression moved through several things in quick succession. Surprise, recalculation, something that might have been embarrassment if he'd let it stay long enough to become that. "Well," he said finally. "I had no idea, I know," I said gently. "Why didn't you say so?" his mother asked, not accusatory, actually wanting to know. I thought about how to answer that. "Because I wanted to see," I said, "how things felt before anyone knew." The room was very quiet. Grant looked at me. His face was doing something complicated. His father cleared his throat. "I may have misspoken earlier about the demanding job. I didn't mean—" "It's all right," I said. "I understood what you meant." He fell quiet. That was perhaps worse for him than if I'd pushed back. The rest of the evening was a specific kind of awkward that I recognized from a handful of moments in my life. The aftermath of a truth that's changed the air in the room, but hasn't had time to settle yet. His parents were careful with me now, very polite. His mother refilled my coffee without being asked. His father sat up a little straighter and spoke to me like I was a colleague he'd just found out outranked him. In the car, Grant was quiet for the first few miles. The town lights gave way to highway. I looked at the dark fields on either side. "You knew the whole drive up," he said finally. "I didn't do it to embarrass anyone," I said. "I know." He tapped the steering wheel once. I wish I'd known too." "You knew I was a surgeon," I said. "I thought you meant, like, assisting." He stopped. "I don't know what I thought. That's kind of the point," I said. Quietly, not unkindly. He didn't say anything for a moment. "Are you upset with me?" "No," I said, and I meant it. What I was thinking was this. The evening had gone exactly as I had half expected and half hoped it wouldn't. Not because his parents were cruel, they weren't. Not because Grant had failed me, he hadn't exactly. But because of what had been visible without anyone trying to show it. The assumptions that were so comfortable they didn't need to be stated. The way a woman in a blue dress holding a bottle of wine could walk into a room and be sorted instantly into a category that had nothing to do with who she actually was, and the way that category determined everything. The questions asked. The ones not asked. The dish towel. That night I lay in the guest room and thought about something one of my attending surgeons had told me during residency. She was a woman who'd been doing this for 30 years, and she said, "You'll spend your career learning to read a room fast." The vitals, the family, the situation, the ability to see what's actually there instead of what you expect. Most people never learn that. They just see what confirms what they already believe. I thought about that for a long time. The next morning, Grant made eggs and we sat at the small table in his childhood kitchen. His parents were still asleep, and he looked at me over his coffee and said, "I've been thinking about last night." "So have I said. "I didn't stand up for you," he said. "I waited. At dinner, when my dad said that about following orders. I didn't say anything right away." "You put your hand on mine," I said. "That's not the same thing." "No," I said. "It's not." He looked down at his mug. "I think I got uncomfortable. I didn't want to make a thing out of it in front of them." "I understand that," I said. "It's your parents' home." "That's not a good enough reason," he said. I looked at him. That surprised me a little. "No," I said. "It's not." He nodded slowly. "I'm sorry." We sat with that for a moment. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Yes, why didn't you tell me?" "The whole picture, I mean, early on." I set my mug down, because the last guy I dated, when I told him on the third date that I was a trauma surgeon, he spent the next 4 months trying to compete with me. Everything became about what he earned, what he'd built, what he'd done. He didn't mean to, but he couldn't seem to stop. And before that, there was someone who just deferred to me constantly, like I was the authority on everything. Both of those things are exhausting in different ways. Grant was quiet. "I wanted someone who would just talk to me," I said, "about trivia, about nothing. Someone whose whole disposition toward me wouldn't change the second they knew my title." "And did it?" he said. "Change?" I thought about the hand on my knee during the drive, the way he'd laughed when I'd known an obscure answer at trivia, the Sunday mornings. "No," I said. "Yours didn't." He exhaled. "But my parents, yes." He rubbed the back of his neck. "They're not bad people." "I know that," I said. "That's what makes it complicated." His mother came downstairs an hour later and found us at the table and poured herself coffee and sat down with us. And there was a kind of careful ease to it, like we'd all decided, without discussing it, that we were going to try to be normal. She asked if I'd slept well. I said I had. She asked about the hospital, different this time, real questions. What did a trauma bay actually look like? How did I know what to do in the first few seconds? She wasn't performing interest. She was actually curious. I answered her, and somewhere in the middle of it, I noticed her eyes change. Not because of the title, because she was finally listening. His father came down last and sat across from me with his coffee and said without preamble, "I owe you an apology for last night." A few of them. I looked at him. "Okay, the comment about following orders was ignorant," he said. I didn't understand what I was talking about. "No," I said. "You didn't." He didn't flinch. "And the other thing, about wanting someone more available for the family. That was, I don't know what that was. Old thinking. It was honest," I said. He looked at me. "Is that your way of accepting the apology?" "It's my way of saying I heard it," I said, "and that honest is a place to start." He nodded once, slowly. It reminded me, somehow, of the way some patients accept a hard diagnosis. Not happy, not broken, just present, adjusting. We stayed until early afternoon. Lunch was sandwiches and potato chips and easier conversation. His father asked about the training process for surgeons with what seemed like genuine interest, not performance. His mother told me that her own mother had wanted to be a nurse, but had been talked out of it by her father back in the 50s and had always regretted it. She said it like it was something she'd been holding, waiting for the right moment to say. "I think about her sometimes," she said, "when I hear about women doing things she couldn't." I thought about that the whole drive home. Grant held my hand the way he always did, but there was something looser in him now, less careful. Like something had been settled that had been quietly unsettled for months without either of us naming it. "Can I ask you something else?" he said, somewhere around the 40-minute mark. You don't have to ask permission, I said. Fair. He was quiet for a moment. Do you think about what it means, for us, that there's this whole dimension of you that I didn't understand? There are dimensions of everyone, I said. You know what I mean. I did know what he meant. I think it means we have more to learn, I said, about each other. Which is true of any two people, I think. The title just made it visible faster. He considered that. My dad asked me last night, after you'd gone to sleep, whether I knew what I was getting into. I looked at him. What did you say? I said I was getting into a life with a person I wanted to be with. He glanced over at me, and that the rest was details. I looked back at the road. The fields were starting to give way to suburbs. That's a good answer, I said. I thought so too, he said. And then, quieter, I'm sorry it took the whole evening to get there. In the weeks that followed, his mother called once to ask for my recipe for something I'd mentioned in passing. A soup my own mother made. We ended up talking for 40 minutes. His father sent a link to an article about a new surgical technique with a brief note that just said, "Saw this. Thought you might find it interesting." I did. They were trying. I could see the trying, and I respected it, even as I noticed, and couldn't stop noticing, that the trying was new. That before last Saturday, there had been no calls, no articles, no real curiosity. The care was genuine now, but it had required information to become genuine. That distinction didn't make me angry anymore. It just made me clear. One evening, I was on the phone with my mother, and she asked how the visit had gone. I told her the broad shape of it. She was quiet for a moment. Did it upset you? She said. No, I said. It clarified things. What did it clarify? I thought about the dish towel, about the phrase "goods, steady work," about Grant's hand on mine, slightly delayed, about his father at the breakfast table the next morning, not hiding from it, about his mother's voice when she talked about her mother's dream. It clarified who everyone actually was, I said, and that turned out to be more useful than a good first impression would have been. My mother made the sound she makes when she thinks I'm right, but is also slightly worried about me. I know that sound very well. Are you happy? She said. I thought about trivia night, about Sunday mornings, about a man who had made eggs without being asked and said the thing he should have said the night before instead of waiting. I am, I said, carefully. She laughed at that. She knew what I meant. Grant and I didn't rush anything after that. We talked more, actually. Real conversations about things we'd been circling without landing on, about what we each expected, about the fact that his family would always see me a certain way now, and that was different from the way I wanted to be seen, and that we would have to build something in the middle of that tension. About what it meant to be with someone the world assessed loudly. He said once, late at night, that he sometimes felt invisible standing next to me. Not because I made him feel that way, because he'd been taught to see the world in terms of legible achievement, and by those terms, the distance between us looked like a gap. I told him the distance was only a gap if he stood on one side of it. He thought about that for a long time. What I know now is that what happened at that dinner wasn't really about my title. It was about what happens when people encounter someone they can't immediately categorize. The discomfort of that. The speed with which people reach for the nearest available box, and what gets lost in that reaching. The actual person standing right there, holding a bottle of wine and already knowing exactly who she is. I learned something that night that I hadn't expected to learn. I'd spent years managing how I was perceived, hiding my title like a card I wasn't ready to play, believing that if I could just get people to know me first, the rest would follow naturally. And some of that was right. Grant did know me first. That mattered. But the other part, the part I hadn't fully reckoned with, was that concealment carries its own weight, that the relief of being treated normally can curdle, slowly, into the loneliness of being unseen. And at some point, those two things aren't the same cost anymore. The most honest moment of that whole evening wasn't the reveal. It was the morning after, at the kitchen table, when no one was performing anything anymore. When his father said what he meant, and I heard it, And when Grant said the thing he should have said sooner and knew it. When his mother talked about her grandmother's unlived dream. That was the room I wanted to be in, not the one where I was impressive. The one where everyone was just present. We got engaged for real, officially, 3 months later. Small ceremony. His parents in the front row. His father shook my hand before it started. A different handshake than the first one. Still firm. But something else in it now. Something more like recognition than assessment. I don't think he'll ever fully understand what it costs to move through the world the way I do. Most people don't, and I've stopped expecting them to. But I've started to believe he's willing to try, and that his mother's stories about her grandmother will stay with her in ways that matter, and that the people who love Grant are, slowly, becoming people who are learning to see. That's not everything, but it's enough to build on. The truest thing I can tell you is this. What people reveal when they believe you have nothing to offer them, that is the clearest window into who they are, not their best behavior, not their efforts once they know the full picture. The unguarded version, the one that surfaces before they know to adjust. Pay attention to that version. It's the one you'll be living with.